Hi, good evening. Welcome once again to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. And we also coming to you live on YouTube. You can get there on the Guyanese Critic page. I missed you for a couple days last week and then today again. Tonight we want to delve into a couple of serious issues. And we have two important guests, two very critical guests. And they come from diverse backgrounds. But one has to do with something that's happening right here in Guyana at the moment. That's a commission of inquiry that is dealing with the 2020 elections. And he was in the midst of it. And he has some interesting thing to say. And an attorney at law, he's going to be stepping into the studio here on Laluni Street in a very short while, a bit late. But in the meantime, we have with us here another guest, interesting guest. And I don't want to waste any time today because there's so many things to discuss, because as we've always said, recording of history is being done right here. Got to get the facts right, and we don't want to waste any time tonight. So thank you for joining us wherever you join us from tonight. Over to my co-host Freddie Kissoon. I want to say good night to him, and he's going to do the honors of introducing our guest here tonight. Over to you, Freddie.
Good evening wherever you are. As I normally say, social media reduces the world to one little room, and you can see all of us now. In the 60s, publishing houses around the world decided to do something, decided the format of publishing, and it became very famous. What the publishing houses did, they reduced the ponderous thoughts of great men and women into one little introductory volume. So from the 60s onwards, you didn't have to read the voluminous works of Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, Martin Luther King, to find out what they were saying. These little introductory volumes were for people who were not interested in politics, philosophy, sociology, world revolution, but housewives and botanists and anthropologists who want to read what Sigmund Freud said, what Karl Marx said. So from the 60s, publishing houses around the world had these slim little volumes called Introduction to. And these little volumes was a concise presentation of the thoughts of very great and complex humans. Now, in London, there's a publishing house that is doing exactly that. And one of the great humans that they've put this little volume on is Walter Rodney. So here is the introductory text to one of the great Guyanese. I put it up on the screen there. It's called A Rebel's Guide to Walter Rodney. And in the series, there is a Rebel Guide to Karl Marx, Rebel Guide to Lenin, Rebel's Guide to Martin Luther King, Rebel's Guide to Malcolm X. These same little volumes. So, A Rebel's Guide to Walter Rodney. If you're young and you don't know, want to read all the volumes of Rodney's work, but what was this man Rodney all about? Please get a copy of A Rebel's Guide to Walter Rodney, and it's written by Chinedu Chukwudinma. Now, in the studio here is the gentleman who wrote this book, Chinedu Chukwudinma. Chinedu, thanks very much for being in the studio.
Thank you.
I have to tell our cameraman you're not in the screen. Are you? Chinedu, you're a very interesting person. You obviously are African in my eyes. You have a British accent, and your last name is has a Sri Lankan touch to it. Chukwudinma. There are lots of Sri Lankans with that kind of name. Who exactly are you?
Right, so when people ask me that question, right, I always have a very long answer. And what I tell them is that I'm half Nigerian, I'm a quarter English, I'm a quarter Tanzanian. My parents were both born in the UK, But I actually was born and grew up in Geneva, Switzerland, and then moved to the UK like 8 years ago to finish my studies. And since then I've been living in London. But you know, who I am isn't really defined by my nationality or my origin. I always considered myself as a revolutionary socialist, you know, somebody who's involved in fighting for the self-emancipation of all the working people and the oppressed, and as an anti-racist activist, somebody who's faced racism into the past and wants a society where we can eradicate racism. And when you ask me who I am, I think those are the things that matter the most to me, and hence my interest in Walter Rodney.
But I left out the most important part. Guyanese should know that the reason why you're here in Guyana is that you're doing a doctoral thesis on Walter Rodney. For someone with no connection with Guyana, Swiss, Tanzania, UK, no Sri Lanka, right?
No, like Zimbabwe.
But this name, if you know Sri Lankan name,
I know.
Chukwudinma, that's some Sri Lankan anyway.
Well, let me come here.
It's a Sri Lankan name.
No. Chinedu Chukwudinma is a typical Igbo name from the eastern part of Nigeria.
Okay, well, it sounds some Sri Lankan, right? Okay, you know those Sri Lankan names, Chinedu, anyway. No, I'm saying to you, Chinedu, you know those Sri Lankan names. Anyway, Chinedu.
The only similarity between my name and the Sri Lankan name is the length. Nothing else.
Not even pronunciation. Why a thesis a doctoral thesis on Walter Rodney, and which university in the UK?
Well, I'm doing it at the University of Oxford.
Oxford University.
Now, why a thesis on Walter Rodney is a long and existential question, and I want to come back to tell you a story about 10 years ago. And this is my connection with Walter Rodney. 10 years ago, I go to Tanzania, where my grandfather and my aunt live, and over there I'm hanging out with some people, and I'm invited to a block party in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and the block parties in Tanzania are always like this interesting place because you have like artists, you have like, you know, young street people, you have like students, and they all gather in one place, and they're kind of there discussing politics to music, to rap music. And one of my friends there, who's a lot older than me, you know, he's my friend but also a mentor figure. He's one of like Tanzania's most famous graffiti artists, and he had his own like line of T-shirts with the face of like Walter Rodney on them. Hi, how you doing, sir? Take a seat. And he gives me a T-shirt with Walter Rodney, and he tells me, "Listen, Chin, you know, this guy Walter Rodney, he's not your usual academic, you know. He's not somebody who sits in his ivory tower, but he's somebody who, you know, goes down and tries to talk to the masses, relates to the masses, and takes an active part in their struggle for justice wherever they are." And, you know, you have to read his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, the book that Rodney is really known for on the African continent. And he also told me, and this is a lot more rare in Africa, to read Grounding with My Brothers. And at the time I was more of this person who was closer to like black nationalist ideas, so like kind of the Black Panthers were my ideal group, and you know, coming to Africa, I had questions like, you know, why is Africa so underdeveloped? Is it simply because we have corrupt leaders, or are there more like historical forces that are there at play? And I think Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, really answered those questions for me, you know, where he really like blames the legacy of the slave trade and colonialism, you know, for robbing the wealth out of Africa and then making Europe rich at the same time. And I think, you know, that book really spoke to me. Or even, you know, when I was a black European kid, like growing up in school, and and your teachers used to tell you, well, you know what, Chin, colonialism, yeah, it had some bad parts, but at the end of the day, you know, colonialism did some good things, like they built railways for Africans and people in the third world. You know, they built a healthcare system, and I think Rodney's book is a perfect antidote to those kind of like racist, idiotic, ignorant statements, where really he, in one chapter of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, he goes round, you know, all these arguments that say colonialism was good for Africa. Well, he says, well, no. If you look at the railways in Africa, they weren't built so that Africans could go and visit their friends, you know. They were built so that the raw materials were shipped from the interior to the to the coast of the country. Or when he talks about healthcare, what he says is that, you know, the Portuguese colonialists were in Africa, had a presence in Africa for like 500 years. And in 500 years, they weren't able to train one single doctor in Mozambique. And so How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is really this book which talks so honestly about the brutality and the legacy of colonialism. And I think it's a must read.
Interesting, and you know what I find interesting about that, and tonight I want to say welcome to our other guest, attorney at law, Selwyn Pieters, and we're going to talk a little more about it in a moment.
Yes,
but it is
my
good
friend Selwyn.
So, what is interesting in what the gentleman has said there, Freddie, in that we have a Guyanese who's recognized in a place in England, and even whose works have been studied. And maybe people want to follow him because of his teachings or maybe the way that he lived. And I think countries would have different personalities. Like you would have a Rihanna for Barbados and people follow them. Here in Guyana, actually for somebody who was fighting, freedom fighters, some people regard him as Dr. Walter Rodney. As far down in England, somebody is looking to write something on him and it's his journey to Guyana. I find that extremely interesting in the whole scheme of things, especially when people are looking back at history, recording history. Who is this man? How important is this man to this country? And you have a Walter Rodney, somebody who's actually doing it.
And you know, my father was mentioned in Grounding with my brother. I'm very happy about that. So my father was friends with Dr. Walter Rodney, and he's in Grounding with my brothers, and as well, you know, I was one of the lawyers that did the Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry with Christopher Ram and everyone else, as you know, in 2014, 2015.
Well, we have to tell our viewers, in case they missed, this is prominent attorney who operates between Canada.
Mr. Selwyn Pieters is grounded. I think he practices law in Canada, but he's also practicing law in Guyana, and I think maybe in other Caribbean places he's going to tell you. But he has done a lot of work in Guyana in our court system, but he's very well known in the Canadian circuit, if you want to call it that, for a lot of civil rights cases. He's always there, and he's been doing some really big cases and coming down to Guyana. During the 2020 elections, I didn't know Selwyn Pieters, I just knew him on Facebook, and then all of a sudden this very large figure burst into life because he was very much in your face. Everybody would remember the Ashman's building, what transpired there. Very critical of what was happening, and then he was also critical going forward in this present time here, 2022. Of governance in this country, things that he believes are not right. And these are the kind of thinkings we don't have to agree, like I've always said, of tolerance in this country.
He has a photographic memory. I was with my dog on the seawall, and this person touched me, and when I turned around, it was Selwyn, and he said to me, you know, on this very day marks 10 years that we became friends. That man, could you imagine that?
Well, when we were at the Pegasus Hotel then, when he had friends who are now enemies of his, we all had dinner at the Pegasus, and yes, Freddie ate a lot.
It was interesting. Look, so here you have some gentleman comes all the way from London into Guyana, and he's writing thesis on Dr. Walter Rodney, and then you have Selwyn Pieters, who has some connections to Dr. Walter Rodney.
Yeah, by the way, I'm a big fan of your blog.
Oh, you are?
So that's interesting.
It's a small world.
My
He would never have imagined that he'd be doing an interview with a guy whose blog he embraces.
Right.
And you would never imagine your father is mentioning Grounders and my brother, and you're sitting next to a guy who's writing a book that your father is on Rodney.
Yes, myself and him have to connect more.
Yeah, you
We
have
have to
to.
exchange contacts and connect.
Okay, but like, you know, since I've been in Guyana for like 3 weeks now, I've realized that Guyana is a very, very small place, and it's funny how like all these personal relationships kind of like enmesh. Kind of everybody, you know, you go out with somebody in Guyana, they're bound to bump into like people that they know. Like even like crazy thing, like I flew from like JFK, and I think I bumped into like 2 people from my flight. I saw them like in town already, and so you know it's that kind of small place where people connect in all kinds of different ways, and I think we're seeing it at play.
And you know what? When you say that, it's important because Guyanese are a unique set of people. Guyanese are 6 races and mixes in between, and there's a certain synergy, there's a certain unity with Guyanese, but also there's also the infighting within Guyanese, whether it's based on race, class. It's mostly class in Guyana because, quite frankly, whether you're black, you're Indian, you're Chinese, or a mixture in between, people at certain levels, they interact very well together unless we're dealing with the toxic politics of Guyana, and the politics in Guyana is very toxic, and it's toxic at certain times.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. Freddie, you would jump in with Mr. Chinedu as you see fit, because I think the conversation is going to be overlapping. Let's jump straight into the 2020 election. We have a COI that's happening right now, and you played a role as an observer, according to my recollection, as an observer for the Guyana Bar Association. Am I correct?
You're correct.
And you are on records as to very vocal. Recording to the people of Guyana your observations of what transpired, especially in the Ashman's building. Fast forward now to the COI. Have you been called to give a testimony or evidence? Have you been asked to do that?
No, I haven't been subpoenaed.
And if you're asked, would you do so?
Well, I can't answer that question at this point, given the fact that I have not been subpoenaed, nor have I been contacted or anything about the Commission of Inquiry.
Would you like to know, as somebody who has Guyanese roots, to be part of an inquiry that try to bring out the facts? I think me as a Guyanese, I want to know what transpired there. There are different kind of versions that are coming on. But would you like to see a forum, this forum, any other forum? I think this forum is here, the COI. Would you like to see yourself playing a role in that? Because you played an integral role.
Well, let me say this. I mean, and obviously I'm being very coy, very diplomatic in how I answer questions with respect to the COI, because quite frankly, I've watched the COI so far. I've watched the witnesses' evidence, except today I haven't seen the evidence because I was in court all day. But I mean, what you have is you have 3 commissioners and you have commission counsel. You have no interplay or no test through cross-examination because there's no other parties with standing that are participating in the Commission of Inquiry. And certainly in a Commission of Inquiry of this sort, you would have expected that there would have been a strong embrace or a strong push forward, so that you have the political parties and the participants who have an interest or could be affected by the findings of that Commission of Inquiry to be participants. You know, that should have been, there should have been an overt effort to have interested parties participate. I mean, so the evidence has not really been tested.
But how do you deal with something like that? On one hand, the people of this country need answers. On the second hand, I think that it's been stated, I've seen it, that we boycotting that, the opposition is boycotting it. How do you deal with the situation? How long does the people, because obviously if you hold an inquiry, there's always going to be one side who's not going to be happy with the format. I think there has to be an agreement that maybe that this is the way we want it before you are going to see people turning up. And I agree with you there.
No, but are there different types of commission of inquiry? If there's a commission of inquiry into a riot, or in which two factions and their leaders were involved, then is obviously the faction should be represented. But there's no, this commission of inquiry, what format should they use to invite political parties? I don't think no political parties have been invited. There were 9 opposition parties that contested the election, plus the incumbent. What is the relation between inviting them in what capacity? Would it not be the correct procedure to draw up a list of the actors, political parties, civil society, observers, and ask them to present their testimony?
But let me take you on, and forgive me, Mr. Chinedu. You see, the problem that you have is that I'm not sure we've reached, and this is a very damning statement, we've reached a level of maturity. I mean, we've seen very serious statements coming from the opposition, which is saying that we won the elections, the government is in place and they have won the elections. I'm sure for all the Guyanese, if you're pandering to your supporters, you would want answers. And here's a perfect opportunity to say, Selwyn Pieters, Freddie, you were there and you made certain statements, but you lied. And here's a perfect opportunity to be able to do that. But then they come back to what's the method and the whole process that's being followed. A man called me just before I came here. The man says, I find it very difficult to understand how we hold in a COI and it's not even in the state media being broadcasted. I couldn't tell him yes or no because I didn't listen to the state media. I followed it on the social media. But something that is supposed to be so profound, or something that is supposed to be earth-shattering, some of the testimonies that's coming out there, man, you'll be broadcasting.
It's not an NCN?
I'm not sure if it's there. I couldn't answer that, but I said...
But you shouldn't say it's not in state media.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what the man is saying, that I can be able to get it anywhere, and where do I... Can Kaiser News or somebody just do it non-stop until it ends from 9 to 4 o'clock? I'm just telling you what the people are saying.
I think it's live. I think it's live on the state media.
I think what the person might want is playback. So I know Newsroom carries it, and so you could find the footage. That's where I go for my.
That's on social media.
Yeah, so if you have Facebook, you can go on Facebook and get the previous live that the Newsroom carries. And I've watched the evidence, and for example, the Assistant Commissioner of Police who was there, Edgar Thomas, he said, "Hey, there was a bomb threat, and I didn't order anyone out of the building when the bomb threat took place. But myself and, myself and the guy from the Ghana Bar Association, one of the vice presidents, Tenny Husty, we were standing with the U.S. ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, and the British High Commissioner when Edgar Thomas orders us out of the building, and the diplomat said, I think it was the Canadian High Commissioner, she said, no, I'm not leaving.
Edgar Thomas ordered you out of the building?
Oh yeah, I have a video. The video is on...
The same Edgar Thomas that...
Yeah, and they said they weren't leaving. I can find the video and play it right now.
Is it the same man that gave evidence of the
Yeah.
Did he give you a reason why he wanted you out of that place?
He said there was a bomb threat. But his evidence was that he didn't order anyone to leave the building. And that's the only reason why when you asked me about this issue of this commission...
Well, look, you have a video of because Mr. Edgar Thomas, over the past 2 years, has been portrayed as the person... Yeah, no, you're saying, and I will take this up. I will definitely take this up. I will take this up to prove that you're right, or to disprove you. I think it needs to be taken up. You have a video clip of the Assistant Commissioner of Police ordering you, Selwyn Pieters, and the Bar Association person out of
Yeah.
Could you supply us with that by tomorrow?
Well, my flight is now. After here, I'm leaving to the airport. But here, what's going to happen?
But that's easy to send it to.
Hang on, let me finish.
Yeah.
Mr. Gildarie will message me so that as soon as I land in Canada, I will get that to you. Or I can even do it from the airport.
Okay.
Mr. Chinedu, I want to ask you a question. You're familiar with what we're talking about here? The elections of 2020?
Vaguely.
Vaguely. If you would have done your research, I would really wanted to ask you what were your thoughts seeing something or reading something like that. Because in one elections in 5 months, we had about 12 to 15 set of court procedures that happened. And it was a surreal, I would think it was a very surreal moment for you sitting those couple of days attachments building. I said, what the hell is happening here? I'm sitting there at Kaicho Radio, myself, Freddie Kissoon, and Yog Mahadi, and we're saying, what the hell happened here? There's a big picture on the front page of Kaicho News of 4 diplomats walking out. And I can't remember how that happens. Diplomatic protesting.
Right, I was there, that was March 5th. But I don't want to, I think this is what I'll say, because I don't want to be portrayed as being on one side or the other, or taking sides. I will say that the events that took place in March of 2020 and following was very unfortunate. It was a very difficult period for all of us as Guyanese. It was a very difficult period for me. It was a very difficult period for everyone, and you would have hoped that this Commission of Inquiry would have been an expansive Commission of Inquiry that would have been able to get down to the bottom of all the issues and to have a rapprochement of sort with all the actors involved, because I mean their job is not to really lay blame or there's no criminogenic consequences from it. You mentioned the opposition is boycotting the Commission of Inquiry. I'm not too sure about that. I mean, I get the sense that the opposition will participate in that Commission of Inquiry at the appropriate time of their choosing. And certainly the commissioners can issue salmon letters. They can issue letters that put people from various political parties and various GCOM actors on notice that, look, you are at risk of adverse findings against you, and so you need to appear and you need to present evidence that would disabuse us of any negative findings against you, or disabuse the evidence that you've already heard or that was already tendered before us. So I mean, the jury is not out on the opposition or any other party with an interest in the proceedings participating. The jury is not even out on me testifying there or not, because obviously I was at the Ashman building. I was there, interestingly enough, I was there with the issue with Dr. Cummins and the foreign observers and diplomats. I was there when I actually gave the advice. I was the one who gave the advice with the flash drive. I was there with the confrontation with Keith Lowenfield around 1 o'clock in the morning.
Before I ask Freddie to switch over to Mr. Chinedu, could you, if I'm to ask Selwyn Pieters, the observer of that 2020 elections, did you make some conclusions as to what transpired at the Ashman's building and what was the intentions of some of the players there?
Well, I wouldn't comment on. I did, and it's on my. You can find it on Facebook.
Synopsis?
No, I'm not going to do that right now, given that Commission of Inquiry has been formed and they have to make findings and recommendations. So I don't want to state on a show as popular as this what my findings, conclusions, and issues were. But I know that my findings, my observations, and my conclusions created a lot of difficulties. That's all I'll say.
I will I'll come back to, Selwyn, I'll come back to you. But I just want to ask, I just want to bring up an issue with Chinedu, which will titillate the thoughts of someone like Selwyn. Chinedu, there is some interesting developments, political developments in the UK, which has reverberated all over the world. It now has a practicing Hindu prime minister. Now, I'm going to call some names which is a phenomenal direction that British politics is going into, but could also be called an infamous direction. Now, I've read people, especially one well-known British historian, I remember his name, talking about the positives of colonialism, and many of these countries would not have been what they are today if it wasn't for the positive contribution of colonialism. Your country has a minister as of my complexion and our complexion. She's African. Her name is Kemi Badenoch. She is originally from Nigeria. That woman is on the record as saying colonialism did contribute positively to the third world. But let's look at some names. High names with high cabinet posts in the British government from Boris Johnson to the present. You had Kemi Badenoch, Syed Javed, Nadine Zahawi, and Rishi Sunak. And then in the cabinet also was Kwesi Kwarteng and Priti Patel. Now, the present government, you have Suella Braverman, which we in Guyana call Minister of Home Affairs. She would be called Home Secretary. We have James Cleverly, a black guy, origin from Sierra Leone, who's the foreign minister. And of course, there's Badenoch. Now, I've called these names because they were people who held some of the most important cabinet positions the past 2 years, some of which hold important cabinet positions, but they're all very, very anti-immigrant. Some of these Indians, East Indians, like Rishi Sunak, Syed Javed, Braverman, you should read the history of how they came into the UK. Syed Javed, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, which we call the Finance Minister here, said his father came with a few pounds in his pocket. The leading anti-immigrant ministers in the UK government are non-white. What is going on there?
Okay, thank you, Freddie. I just want to put it out there before the show. I thought we'd agreed that we would talk on my book, but I see that you can't stick to the script and that you're asking me questions about British politics.
Well, I think our viewers would need to know what's going on there.
What's going on there is that the Tory party, so the Conservative Party in the UK, is very good at tokenism. Very good at putting people of colour in high positions who are actually not really representative of the party at all.
Window dressing? Window dressing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I would say for those people, you know, the Syed Javeds, the Priti Patels, the Suella Bravermans, how can they appear even to look more racist than their white counterparts? And you know, it's the same phenomenon when you get stopped by a black cop or a female officer. Sometimes your treatment is always worse than when you get stopped by the white officer, because they're as a minority. You know, they're in that position that they have to prove themselves to their colleagues in order to show their allegiance and how well they assimilated into society. And I think that's what's at stake here. But what I would say with Rishi Sunak, he is not somebody who is there to defend the interests of working class people in the UK, no matter their ethnic background or their origins. And the Tory party fundamentally, is the party of the interests of the rich and the powerful, and that's where their allegiance lies. And I think, my purpose in the UK is to unite, ordinary people of working class people of white background, of Asian background, because most of the people of Asian background and African background are working class, against this government, which is making us miserable every day.
Selwyn, there's interesting developments in the other half of your territory, Canada. Trudeau is a minority party in government, and the NDP, the party I like, although I like Trudeau himself, but the NDP is headed by a Sikh. He has working class credentials. The way the Labour Party in the UK and the Lib Dems have the reaches into working class existence. Does the Sikh party, the guy named Singh?
Yes, Jagmeet Singh, and I'm proud of him because Jagmeet Singh was 1 year behind me in law school. So we went to the same law school, and Jagmeet Singh was a defense lawyer before he became a politician, and he rode his bicycle from his home to the courthouse, and even when he was a member of the Ontario legislature, he rode his bicycle. Jagmeet Singh he's prime ministerial material, and he may well smash that bar in the next election, except that he's losing a lot of credibility because he's propping up Trudeau in a lot of stuff that he shouldn't. Their party is basically keeping Trudeau alive, otherwise we'd be back in another election, and Trudeau is not popular right now, but if you're going to the extent that he's Sikh, he's a racial minority, and he wears a turban, it is highly symbolic. But Canada, Canada is straddling two different grounds. You probably heard about the trucker convoy protests in February that shut Ottawa down for an entire month, and the police were not able to move them until an Emergencies Act came into power, so that they froze their assets. They did a whole bunch of stuff and grounded that to a halt, and some people are still in jail as a result. But you're asking about Jagmeet Singh, and he's a very good politician, and I think he is right now he's the second most powerful man in power, really, because he's basically, if it wasn't for his party propping up Trudeau, they'd be out of power already. There'd be an election. And he's making a lot of social welfare policies, like we're going to be having free dental care, a whole bunch of stuff Trudeau has to do. All those NDP policies, those socialist policies, Trudeau have to bring it into force, and the Conservatives do not like it.
Selwyn, I can't let you come to this program. I've known you for 10 years, and I have a positive opinion of you, and I know your intellect. I believe the viewers would want to hear Selwyn Pieters take commentary or analysis of 2015 to 2020.
I think I'm going to take a pass in 2015 to 2020. What I'll say right now is that Guyana, according to various reports, Guyana's GDP and everything is rising 48%. The GDP has risen. Guyana is now one of the top grossing countries in the world. It's making billions of dollars in oil wealth, and so Guyana is on the rise, and Guyana has the opportunity to transform itself through proper leadership, through proper infrastructure development, and through good governance. And that's what you want. You want good governance, but you also want the opposition and the government to be speaking to each other, to be collaborating, to make things happen in the same way that we were glowingly speaking about the collaboration between Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau a few minutes ago.
If President Ali asks you, because for the 10 years I've known you, you haven't been in one fixed ideological mode. Okay? If President Ali says to you, look, Selwyn Pieters, would you help this government or serve this government in any capacity? So you use the word, you use the French word yourself, rapprochement, to bring about ethnic and class rapprochement. Would you seek the embrace?
Well, President Ali had offered me a position. I don't know if I could say it on television. You're going to have to forgive me, President Ali, that I tell the whole of Guyana that you had offered me a job as senior legal consultant in constitutional affairs. So I was already offered something. I was offered prosecutorial positions in Guyana, all of which I rejected. But let me say this. I mean, if the government of Guyana, whether it's President Ali, who is, I still consider him a friend of mine. Ali is in my phone, and he used to call me. He hasn't called me since I started doing those cases with the opposition. So I don't know if we're still friends, but President Ali and Vice President Jagyo, they're all in my phone, and they all called me when they needed to call me. So, and you know, and we still talk. The last time I was here in July, I met with Vice President Jagyo. If they offer me a position where I'm not pitted one race against the other or one people against the other, I would certainly consider it, because I feel that you know, when we speak about one Guyana must be one Guyana. One Guyana must be all embracive of everyone. I mean, there's a discussion about race. There's a discussion about racism. There's a discussion about classism. There's a discussion about ethnicity. And we can't debunk those issues as issues that are prevalent in every society, including Guyana. And sometimes we want to put our head in the sand and say there's no racism. Racism exists in every single society. Ethnic cleavages still exist in Guyana. And so, you know, if President Ali wants to appoint me to head the Human Rights Commission or one of those agencies that can promote racial unity and harmony, I'm certainly prepared to accept it without any reservation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chinedu, you're here and you write a doctoral thesis on Dr. Walter Rodney. You're here 3 weeks. And who you turning to get information for that?
I'm turning to you. I'm turning to Freddie, but I'm speaking to people from all across the board. So I'm speaking to Rodney's former friends, former comrades. I'm speaking to people from the PPP and sometimes former people from the PNC, and also I'm also speaking to, you know, ordinary people who I have conversations with, and this has been quite a learning curve for me coming to Guyana, where I've spoken to a number of young people who are like my age or people who are even younger, sometimes a bit older, and you know, I'm absolutely appalled at like how little they know about Walter Rodney. And you know, I was warned of this before coming to Guyana, because you know, at one of my book launches, an African guy stood up, a guy from Botswana, and he told me, you know, when I was growing up, I used to read How Europe Developed Africa with my friends as a workshop on the trees in Botswana, and I came to Guyana, you know, to do my pilgrimage. And he says that he was shocked to see, like, you know, the state of his grave, or that his books weren't like available. And I've experienced that myself, you know, just going to like the National Library, where I go sometimes to study and do some work. Then I say, hey, let me ask if Rodney's children's books are there, you know, the Kofi Badu from Africa and the Lakshmi from India. I couldn't find them on the shelf. They have a slip box system where you find the reference for the book. They didn't have the one for Lakshmi out of India. Two fundamental children's books, that can inform you on that are so rich in Guyanese history and where the working class, in Guyana was made, where it comes from. Even when you look at his more academic book, High Europe Underdeveloped Africa, I mean they're only available at the National Library on reference. And the books that they give you, they're the old editions from 1972. When the Walter Rodney Foundation and Walter Rodney's family has done quite a tremendous amount of work at getting Rodney known across the world, and it seems to me that it hasn't yet trickled down in Guyana. I hope there's some positive conversations that are going on, but definitely more's to be done, and obviously I don't have any grand pronouncements of who's responsible for that, because I think, as a guest here in this country, I would defer to you and what you guys think about this, on why Rodney's legacy is not promoted enough.
Did you ask a question?
You could ask Selwyn that, why Rodney's legacy is not promoted. You could ask Selwyn that.
I think there's going to be a shift. They're going to start teaching more about Rodney in schools, but I have 4 boxes of materials from the Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry. I'm happy to donate them to you if you wish. There are lots of materials there from various files that we had access to that you may not have access to, and if you're writing on Walter Rodney, you should have a full record, and I'd be happy to give them to you.
I would be more than happy to have them.
Okay, but I think the teachings about Walter Rodney should start in university. And Mr. Kissoon or Dr. Kissoon, you're a historian, and so maybe you can tell us about the lapse, because you should be one of the people at the University of Guyana that inculcating, just like how there's EDIs, Rodney should be infused in every single course that's been taught in Guyana, so that people have an understanding of Walter Rodney's position and where we were at in 1979, 1980, and how things came to where they are and how we've progressed since then.
How is your father mentioned? Tell us. You said your father was mentioned.
Well, my father lived in London at the same time that Walter Rodney lived in London, and grounding with my brothers came as a result of discussion groups that they used to have. These groups of intellectuals used to get together, whether it's on a Friday night or on the weekend, and they used to have discussions on various subject matters.
What's your father's name?
Bertram Abrams. And so
I want to ask Mr. Chinedu, during your 3 weeks here, were you given different narratives as to the death of Walter Rodney? One side says he was murdered, the other side says he blew himself up accidentally.
Yes.
You're hearing that?
Yes, I've heard different narratives from different people who I've spoken to.
Okay, and did you ask if there's any evidence that would back that up?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and then you were able to get those evidence?
Sometimes I have, and sometimes I haven't.
Interesting.
Selwyn, forgive me. You're my friend, but I kind of uncomfortable. I kind of sense evasiveness from you in straightforward the election, what's going on in Guyana, the 2015-2020 government. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I'm sensing the Selwyn Pieters I know, but backed right away when you ask him these questions. I don't want to make you feel more uncomfortable, so I'm going to shift ground. Walter Rodney, the commissioner in court, you give tremendous, you have the boxes that you have to post from Canada to London. The conclusion was the state was involved in his assassination. You haven't moved away from that.
Well, the RODNEY Commission of Inquiry heard the evidence. It had participation from Basil Williams, who represented the PNC, and I took over from Basil Williams, representing the PNC when he became the Attorney General. The Commission of Inquiry made findings. And those are the findings that exist. Those findings remain unchallenged.
Thank you very much. Mr.
There was no evasiveness there at all.
I'm not going to apologize to Mr. Selwyn Pieters. I could ask him the question and he could do his lawyer thing. Mr. Selwyn Pieters, coming down to 2022, Irfan Ali government, are there things that you don't like or things that you would like to see in Guyana, that maybe missteps about this government? I put all that in one. I want to hear some opinions from you.
Wait, sorry, why are you jumping? Because we were on the Commission of Inquiry, and I think it's an interesting question. Well, on the findings, because some of our viewers on here are not all familiar with the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, and it'd be great if you could spell for us what the findings of the Commission of Inquiry of Walter Rodney were, and what the conclusions were on who killed Walter Rodney.
Well, I'm going to answer the questions that Gildarie just asked. That's what I'm going to do. I know it's disappointing.
Invading the young man.
I know it's
we have to nurture these young intellects.
I know it's disappointing to you, but that is what I'm going to do. So we asked about the missteps about Dr. Irfan Ali in 2022. Look, I think this. I'll say that the government of Guyana and the Ali government started off on a bad foot when it started laying off all those public servants when it came into power. It exacerbated that when it interfered with the Police Service Commission, firing Paul Slow, suspending Paul Slow and the other commissioners when the president had no constitutional authority to do so. The president appointed a commissioner of police, and the appointment was using the doctrine of necessity. When the doctrine of necessity, when the circumstances that called for the invocation of the doctrine of necessity did not exist, the president appointed a police service commission, and the police service commission is still not functional because there's no chairman of the public service commission. And yet, all these decisions are protected in law by a de facto doctrine, which, so there's the Chief Justice, the acting Chief Justice, and the acting Chancellor. The President has made no tangible effort to engage with the leader of the opposition so that we can have a substantive so that we can have a substantive Chancellor and a substantive Chief Justice. And you could go down the line about different things where the President should properly consult with the leader of the opposition and include the leader of the opposition or other opposition participants, and him and his government have not done so.
Wait. Tell us some of the positive things the government has done, and tell us what you think are some of the egregious directions the opposition has gone into.
Well, let me tell you what I like. I'll tell you what I like. I told you what I don't like. I like the fact that President Ali goes into all the communities. I like the fact that, I like the fact that he grounds with the people like a man in the street kind of thing. I think there's a lot of potential in the president that way. I like the fact that, in most cases, not all, but in most cases when he says he's going to do something, he does it. So, he goes to Buxton and they have some problems, like Sideline Dam and those places. President Ali, you need to send that in there or one of them to fix those fix those streets that are bad. What time is it?
But that's the only, what you think the opposition has behaved responsibly? Do you believe the opposition has a right for the past 2.5 years to claim an election was not legal when there is no international body, no government in the entire world, and no accredited observer team that has said this result was not legal?
This is what I'll say about that, and this is, Kenya had this election recently.
Selwyn, could you answer the question?
Yes,
please?
I'm answering the question. Kenya had this election recently, and there was a petition filed by Raila Odinga. That petition was speedily dealt with, and Dr. William Ruto was sworn in as president, and things are running smoothly. Guyana, the election took place, and one of the election petition was just dealt with at the final level of court, and another.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking if the election was free and fair, and the rightful winner was installed. Would you stop being evasive?
No, in my own view, the election was free and fair, and free from fear. How about that? You're asking me my opinion. You got it.
Well, it's not explanatory enough.
You ask him what you want. Have you been very clear?
I asked him about the election, and he's gone to Kenya and the election petition.
Well, let me ask him. I know you want to answer. You're not going to.
No, you answer. Maybe he.
Selwyn Pieters, attorney at law.
He wants to know down by the way.
Based on the evidence, what you saw, what you observed, who won the elections?
Well, that's a question that was determined by GCOM. How about that?
GCOM made...
The Guyana Election Commission made the declaration as to who won the election based on the number of votes tabulated.
And you accept the GCOM declaration?
I do.
You do?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So we come down to the closing time. Mr. Chinedu, I think you would want to make an appeal because you're gathering information for a book that you, thesis that you're writing on Dr. Walter Rodney, all the way from London. And I presume you want to meet as many when you go back, I think, or this week here. And maybe you would want to reach out to other resources before you go.
Well, actually, no. I've reached out to all of the people that I needed, and I am leaving very shortly. Are
you disappointed in what you came for to this country?
No, not at all. Actually, Guyana has been a great place. First of all, the food has been absolutely amazing. And it's funny because when you read about Guyanese history in the 1970s, especially like the racial divide, which starts, way back from like the plantation slave economy. You expect to find, I expected to find, I don't know, a society that was more like, America, that looked like a checkers board,
Yes.
Black and white, segregated. I was in Atlanta conducting my research. That's what I saw. It was a very segregated society. When I arrived in Georgetown, it was completely different, where you have like Indo-Guyanese people, African people, mixing, and then you throw like Amerindians into the mix, Chinese people, and then all the mixed people in it, and that's very helpful that people from below are spontaneously mixing with each other. For me, that holds a real potential for united anti-racist class struggle against the people at the top of society, because the people at the top can divide you as much as possible, but people's personal experience with one another tell a different story, and I think that's always something positive. And I think Walter Rodney's fundamental legacy, especially in Guyana, when he's talking about racial unity, working class unity, he's not talking about a unity between like one or two leaders. He's not talking about a unity of a president and a prime minister. No, he's talking about a more organic unity that happens from below, that happens organically through the struggle in the streets and the workplaces.
I hope that you understand it's curry chicken and not chicken curry. No, it's the other way around actually. Second story. Selwyn, I don't know, maybe there's a couple of things that you want to say to the people. I leave it to you.
No, I'm very impressed with the young intellectual that I'm sitting next to, and your thoughts, your final thoughts that you just stated, they're embraced by me.
Yeah, I had
am
way more
optimistic.
talks if I was invited on the program to talk about my book and not about UK politics.
No, but you know what? You can. I mean, if you're here for much longer, I mean, you can probably come in Guyanese Critic in the morning. There's tons of programs that in Guyana that you could utilize. So it's not lost. But I mean, the question about race and politics in the UK, Guyanese have been pretty much interested, given
Yes,
that
we are.
it's a brown-skinned person who is the prime minister now of the United Kingdom. So a lot of people in Guyana of all races have been talking about it and have been quite excited and interested in it. So you've presented your thoughts on it, and you've presented an enlightening opinion
I
about
learned a
it.
lot, I must say that.
Well, yeah, and also how it ties into an issue that's concretely related to Guyanese people is that since I've been in Guyana, everybody's been coming up to me with the visa thing, because the UK I think removed like visas travel, and it's been quite impressive because since when they clocked that I live in London and stuff like that, well, people come up to me, oh yes, my son is looking for opportunities in London now that there's the visa and stuff. And sometimes in some of my conversations you get the impression of disillusionment, like of illusionment actually, that this is going to be a free pass. And then I go on the internet, I look up and it says, oh, the visa is only valid for like 6 months for one. And second of all, if you want to understand one thing, the government under Rishi Sunak is not a government that likes immigrants. I'm sorry, but like Sweta Braverman, who's in his government, is the architect behind this Rwanda stream, where if you're like, a refugee putting in a claim to stay in the UK, well,
She said she has a dream about it, an obsession about it, sending refugees to Rwanda.
Yeah.
She actually said that at the Tory conference.
Yeah, and they tried to fly a plane. So they tried to fly a plane to Rwanda, and what was amazing is that working class people,
Yes.
in the UK protested against it to stop these planes from going to Rwanda. So the potential in the UK to fight against this government and the pushback is actually quite live and quite well.
Interesting. Freddie, very quickly.
Well, I just want to wish Selwyn a safe journey. He's going to Tulare, and I hope that this program projects his presence in the corridors of power. President Jagdeo and Selwyn can have a discussion about, he's openly said he's willing to contribute. Jonathan Yearwood, one of the leaders of a civil society group in Article 13, says he's willing to work with President Jagdeo, but President Ali, but the parameters have to be drawn up, and I think more or less he said the same. So Selwyn, I hope there could be some dialogue in the future with President Ali. I must say I find Dr. Ali positive, and I hope there can be a rapprochement, not between you and President Ali, but a rapprochement that will come out of the dialogue with you and President Ali, a rapprochement in wider forces, but safe travel, man.
Well, I'm not looking for anything from President Ali. Let me make that clear. I'm doing well in Canada.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Two interesting fellow. One of them not a Guyanese, and the other one, well, born in Guyana. I think
Doing well in Canada.
doing well in Canada. But it's interesting. It's good to hear from different views, and you had some perspectives here of things that is happening in London, in Europe, and it's good that we educate ourselves, because you cannot be an island. We can't be alone. We have to pay attention to what's happening in Brazil, what's happening in Suriname, what's happening in the US. Maybe Biden is losing control, or definitely losing control of Congress based on the trends that's happening there. It's been a pleasure as always. It's good to be back, and I want to say thank you very much to my co-host Freddie Kissoon, and of course the two gentlemen, Mr. Chinedu all the way from London, and Mr. Selwyn Pieters, who's heading to the airport in a very short while to leave us. It's always good to talk to him. He has his views, and we're willing to listen to that. It's all good for the conversation of this country. Good night, folks, wherever you are, until we meet again on Friday.